Roundup of round 2 for the Wales team at the Chess Olympiad, Tromsø 2014. First off, the women's team had played a very talented Indonesian team, and despite ultimately losing 4-0, the games were very hard fought, and credit must be given to the players, in particular to Alyssa, who very nearly hung on board 4 for a hard-earned draw. In the open section, Wales were paired against Tanzania, and we were high rated on all the boards and ultimately won relatively straightforwardly 3.5 to 1/2, with David Sands drawing against the Tanzania board 2 with black. The game I would like to show today is David Jameson's win with the white pieces against Tanzania's board 4 Nurdin Nassuji. Okay, playing white, Nurdin began with e4. And David went into the rouleau pairs or Spanish variation, as shown by the following sequence of moves. Here, David chose to play the open Spanish categorized by knight takes e4, and white responded with rook e1. More normal is to play d4, and the game may continue with the following sequence of moves. And we end up with a complicated position with approximately equal chances for both sides. Anyway, reverting back to 6 rook e1, black then continued with knight c5 attacking the bishop. For white to regain the pawn, it's necessary now for him to have to give up the bishop for the knight. So as follows. So we've got the pawn here. Bishop e7 to stop any threats along the e file. d4, knight e6, c3 protecting the pawn, castles, knight d2. Better perhaps would be bishop e3, because bishop e3 will now see after knight d. As was played, and this allows black to improve his pawn structure, and ultimately probably lead to a slight advantage for black. So takes, knight on a rerouting. Black exchange queens here. It probably makes sense for David to do this, because David's queen would find it difficult to find a good square on the board, whereas perhaps White's queen could enter on the king side somewhere and maybe offer some attacking opportunities. So rook e1, attack the bishop, defend the bishop, again attack, and knights moves, exchange the knights, and c6 because the pawn on c7 was vulnerable to the bishop. So some more developing moves, and we reach the following position where the idea of c5 is to just gain some more space. Eventually black would like to keep pushing on the queen side and hopefully induce some weaknesses so the two bishops will have an opportunity to start winning some pawns. So bishop e5, knight was under attack, f4 attacking the knight. Here I believe white probably miscalculated, because he does ultimately end up losing a pawn after bishop takes d5. If in this instance rook takes d5, then there's quite a nice little tactic involving bishop takes f4, bishop takes c5, and black can win material with simply rook takes c5, rook takes rook, and then bishop e3 check, skewering the king and the rook. So going back to f takes e5, rook takes e5, so now black is a pawn up. After rook a d1, bishop c6, rook d8, rook d8, rook d8, king g7. If we assess his position, as we said, black is a pawn up, but he must be careful because there are opposite bishops on the board. So it's important the rooks aren't swapped off, because opposite coloured bishop endgames are notoriously known for their drawing possibilities, and that's obviously not what we want in this situation here. So king g7, king f2. Perhaps black, or rather white, was counting on in this position here, being able to play b4, with the idea being that after pawn takes pawn, bishop d4 will pin the rook. So obviously that's not allowed, but instead of pawn takes pawn, black simply has rook e2, threatening to take on g2. So a sample variation may go something like this, or maybe bishop takes pawn here. And in this position, it should be fairly straightforward for black to win with the extra kingside pawns. Okay, let's go back to the position. So where were we? We were on. So yeah, after king f2, rook f5 check. Unfortunately, white must move his king back to g1 to prevent further materials. So g5 from black. Black's plan is to try and advance his kingside pawns and create further weaknesses around the white king. Notice that white's bishop is not participating in the game, and it's quite hard to play chess if your pieces are badly placed. Okay, so if we continue now, rook d6, further pawn moves and inducing weaknesses, g3, h4, takes, rook d2 offering some defense, h3. Notice how the king is in danger of being checkmated here, so the bishop comes back to try and help out. Bishop g2, rook d1 stopping the mate, rook f1 was a mate threat there, so c4 space gaining, bishop g3. Now the king comes in to hopefully try and help checkmate the king, white's king. Rook d1, king e6, bishop f2, rook d3. White should certainly swap rooks here and then just play bishop e3 to stop the pawn. There would be some chances for white then to draw. Instead, in time trouble, white plays rook e1, and this allows the king to march forward. So let's follow this. King f5, king's marching forward, and after bishop g3 check, which is the final mistake of the game, this allows David to have a nice finish involving an exchange sacrifice. So David simply can take the bishop here with the rook. So let's see how this goes. Rook takes bishop, pawn takes check, king takes pawn. Now the big threat is to play h7, h2 check, and then h1 queen and mate. So the only way this can be prevented is by rook e3 check, but after bishop f3, black's threat of pushing the pawn can only then be prevented by sacrificing the rook for the bishop. So for instance, white's best move is rook takes bishop, king takes, and perhaps king here. But then we have a very simple winning king and pawn ending, with the f-pawn ultimately deciding the game. So, congratulations to David, who's won his first game for Wales in the Olympiad.